Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
Legends can come from anywhere. They're the people who want more from life, who grow up to be great. They all begin in the same place, with a dream and the chance to make that dream come true. They get their start in EduCare schools from Nebraska to Maine to Chicago. Here they're nurtured, physically, intellectually, emotionally, until age 5. With quality early childhood education, they get the foundation they'll need to succeed in school and in life. They're the future teachers of the world, the future doctors and scientists, architects and entrepreneurs, artists and astronauts. I'm John Legend, and I want to help our children achieve their full potential. When we invest in them, we invest in us.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Advisor and Assistant to the President, Valerie Jarrett.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the White House. For those of you who are here with us today and those of you who are watching online, we are here for the first ever White House Summit on Early Childhood Education, a historic day. So why are we here? We're here because everyone now understands the importance of investing in our young children. Early childhood education is not just good for the children, it's good for their families, their communities, society, and our nation. Anybody disagree with that? No, absolutely not. So a couple of years ago, in the President's State of the Union, he called on Congress to pass legislation that would provide that every child, regardless of their zip code, would have an opportunity for affordable, quality early childhood education. Well, as may not be a surprise to you, Congress did not act. And so what he did last year is he said, look, we're going to continue to work on Congress because that's the best solution. But in the meantime, we're going to travel around the country to cities and states, and we're going to find coalitions of the willing. And we're going to call on elected officials in those states to launch an effort to provide early childhood education. And I'm proud to announce that since then, 34 states around the country, 34 states have added to their investment in early childhood education to the tune of $1 billion. That's progress, don't you agree? So then we were trying to figure out, well, what can we do to build on that momentum? And so Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, Cecilia Munoz, who is the Director of the President's Domestic Policy Council, and who I'll have the pleasure of introducing to you in a moment, the three of us put our heads together and we said, what if we, in addition to working with the elected officials, let's work with the foundations who have been so invested in this in the private sector for so long. And so who do we call? We called some people whose names will be not unknown to any of you. We called J.B. Pritzker and we called Susie Buffett. J.B. and M.K. are here. Please stand and be recognized. And Susie is at home, unfortunately, a little bit under the weather, but when I spoke with her last night, she assured me that she would be watching online. The President called her from Air Force One and said, I can't believe you're not here, since you and JB were the ones that really helped first launch this effort, but we miss her too. So hi, Susie, I know you're watching out there. So then we reached out even further, and Chris Perry from the First 5 Years Fund and David and Laura Mirage also stepped up in a big way, and I know they're here. Please stand also and be recognized. And then there's all of you. And we just thank everyone who's here. Everyone who's in this room has made a commitment, and everyone who's in this room has agreed to help us expand and take our effort to scale. So we're starting with a coalition of the willing, and it's our job to launch this initiative and take it from there. So what's happening today? Today, you're going to hear from President Obama a little later, and he's going to issue a major challenge to business leaders, to philanthropists, to advocates, to public officials, and every single American to focus on the smallest of us. At a time when consensus here in Washington can be a rare commodity, believe me, the coalition of folks who are stepping up for our new initiative called Invest in Us is impressive. The initiative is gaining steam in large part because of many of you. So today, the President will announce an additional $750 million in new federal grant awards to reach over 63,000 additional children. And this is where you come in, we'll also be announcing $330 million in private sector investment. Thank you, one and all. Give yourself a round of applause. My goodness. The goal of which is to expand our reach so that we can touch many more children and make sure they have that equal opportunity. But today is just the beginning. Today, a group of private citizens, many of whom are here, are going to launch the Invest in Us. And it's an independent campaign aimed at galvanizing private sector investment in early childhood education. And I encourage everybody to go on to investinus.org. It is up and running and will help educate you further about what this is all about. Invest in Us will build momentum that is already building around our states and communities across our country. The reality is this. According to a new report just released by the White House Council on Economic Advisors, research shows that every dollar invested in early childhood education experiences in the earliest years of our life will seek a financial return of $8.60. Now that's a pretty good investment. The best research shows that early childhood education creates a more skilled workforce, higher wages, reduced government spending from remedial programs, and better overall health. How could anybody resist that investment? Quality early childhood education programs pay off for our children, our families, for our nation, and that's what we're here to do. And in fact, if you want to read a little bit more about it, JB and I co-authored an op-ed that appears right now, I hope, in USA Today. So on a personal note, I'll have to say this to you. There is no topic, as many of you know, closer or dearer to my heart than this. Now, most children's first words are, or three words are, I am hungry, I am sleepy, I want my mommy, I want my daddy. Mine were early childhood education. Now, why is that? Because my mom, Barbara Bowman, who also has herniated disc and can't be with us, but who I hope is watching online. I talked to her a few minutes ago and walked through how to click into our link, but this has been her passion for over 50 years. She's really been on the forefront, a pioneer in increasing everyone's awareness about the importance of early childhood education. Co-founded Erickson Institute, worked and ran the early childhood education for the Chicago public schools, and when Arne Duncan first came to Washington, she joined him for the first 6 months focusing on early childhood education, and what she said to him then was, you really should have a White House summit on early childhood education. So Mom, it took us a little while, but we're here and we're doing it today, so I'm very grateful for her efforts as well. So we have a robust day ahead of you, but I want to say to you at the opening what I know you'll hear throughout the day and when the Vice President closes at the end, and that is this is the beginning. And so as we think about children's lives, that's the beginning, and we want to make sure that they go into adulthood. We want to say the same thing about our Invest on Us program. And so to kick us off today, I'm fortunate to have someone with whom I've worked with since day one at the White House, who used to run intergovernmental affairs, and for the last several years has been, as I mentioned, the President's director of his Domestic Policy Council, and who also cares passionately about this issue, not just as a senior advisor to the President, but also as a mom. And for all of the parents out there whose children have had the advantage of early childhood education, as my daughter Laura did, as I know Cecilia's children did, we know firsthand every child in America deserves what our kids have, and that's what we're here to make sure happens. So thank you again, everybody. Cecilia?
Thank you so much, Valerie. This is a great opportunity to say how honored I am to work with you, especially on something of this incredible importance. So thank you for your leadership. Good morning, everybody. Let me add my warm welcome to Valerie's. This is a really important day. It was a long time coming. And we are here very much because of your commitment, but also because of the commitment of the President of the United States. He's one of you. He's a believer in early childhood education. And he has been at it since day one, since we started, because he understands so deeply how important early childhood education is to our ultimate success as a nation, right? It's important to these children. It's important to families and communities, as Valerie said. It is also incredibly important if we're going to fulfill our promise as a nation to make sure the doors of opportunity are open to all, and that we continue to lead the world economically. That starts with our kids, and it starts in the earliest years, and the President of the United States understands that very, very deeply, which is why we've been at this since the very beginning. So while there is a lot of focus on what we're trying to do legislatively and a lot of celebration of what we have been able to do today, it is also true that we've built a very strong foundation really since the moment the President got here, starting with establishing the MICVI program at HHS, which provides home visits which are proven to be effective to children and their families in their very earliest years. We have expanded this program. Congress has committed $1.9 billion for voluntary home visiting across all 50 states. That supports 1.4 million visits in over 700 communities. This is support for families and children in the very earliest years. It's something that we very much hope to expand. The President also prioritized expanding the Head Start and the early Head Start programs and made a commitment to making sure that we're investing in quality in those programs. He launched a Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge, which has provided over $1 billion to programs in 20 states. We've taken incredibly important steps to improve the quality of federally funded childcare, and that's a more than $2 billion investment. And just a few weeks ago, the President signed into law some very, very important protections for children, safety requirements for children in childcare facilities. So this is a robust area of work for this administration. And as Valerie referenced in 2013, the President introduced a really big play calling for high-quality pre-K for every 4-year-old in the United States, as well as further investments in the earliest years. Now, as you also heard from Valerie, while we do have bipartisan legislation that's been introduced, we have a long way to go before we see this come into law, although that is not a question of if, it's a question of when. It is also true that we've made tremendous progress. So this year in the State of the Union, as Valerie referenced, the President talked about building a coalition of the willing, coalitions of the willing, if you will, all over the country. And here you are, right? And you're people who've been working on this all of this time. But we've also collectively, over the course of the last year, because of the work you've done around the country, because of the President raising the bar on this issue and lifting it up, we've all been able to up our game. So today, as you heard, we are announcing $750 million worth of grants in the early childhood space. And I should point out that in if you're a Washington person, you have heard this word, in the Cromnibus, which is the government funding legislation, which the Congress just revealed last night, there is another $750 million for early childhood in that bill. So even in this moment where it is hard to get anything done through Congress, we got an investment out of this bipartisan Congress this year, which we are committing and putting forward today, and another investment coming forward of $750 million. That is very, very important progress, and this group has added to that to the tune of another $330 million. So this is a $1 billion day for early childhood. Give yourselves a pat on the back. I also just want to put in a plug to ask you to remember the value of innovation in this space, in its ability to improve the quality of early learning opportunities for our children. We can move our nation from being 28th in the world to being back at the top, and we must, and we're counting on you to help us do that. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce our amazing Secretary of Education, but I want to just beg your indulgence for a minute and thank some of the very hardworking and extremely tired people who have helped pull this event together. I see some of them kind of scattered over there. But from my own team of the Domestic Policy Council, James Quall, Roberto Rodriguez, Kim Burgess, Rafael Lopez, and Zealand Hoover, they haven't gotten a lot of sleep, but we're really grateful for their efforts. On Valerie's team, Kyle Learman and Liza Heyman. On the Intergovernmental Affairs team, Megan Gardner and Elias Alcantara, and there are a whole lot of others, including from the Department of Education. I see Libby Doggett standing over there, Deb Delisle, Stephen Hicks, Suzanne Immerman, and Christiane Gale. And at HHS, Linda Smith, Chantel Meeks, Shannon Rudskill, and Doug Steiger. These are some hardworking people. These are people who are true believers. They really give it their all. They leave it all on the field every single day. So can we show them a little love, please? All right, you ready to get to work? Yep. All right. So no better person to start us off in getting this work done than our indefatigable, extraordinary Secretary of Education. Arnie has come to, I think he rolls his eyes when I do this, but every time I introduce him, I can't help myself from describing him as someone whose hair is almost literally on fire with his sense of urgency for what he's working on. We are so lucky for his leadership. The country is better off because he made this commitment and he's stuck with it all of these years. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce and lead the next panel, our Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan.
Good morning. I've been in this auditorium 100 times. It's never looked like this. Gets upgraded for you guys. I get to play Oprah. I get to ask the questions rather than answer them. So I always look forward to these days. And maybe we'll just go down the line, have folks introduce themselves, and then we'll just sort of have a conversation. So we'll start with Sheriff.
Sheriff Russ Martin from Delaware County, Ohio.
LaJune Montgomery Tabor, President and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
Good morning, Eric Gordon. I'm the superintendent of the Cleveland Public Schools in Cleveland, Ohio.
Good morning. I'm Professor Hiro Yoshikawa from the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at New York University.
Thanks so much. I'll just start with the sheriff. And you and I just met, don't know each other well. I assume, like so many folks who go in law enforcement, you went in to help people, but not everyone in law enforcement is focused on early childhood education. And we love the partnership. More and more folks are. But I just sort of be curious, when did you start thinking about this? Was it something related to your professional life? Was it something more personal? And why are we seeing this movement of more and more folks in law enforcement starting to step up and be part of the solution on this issue?
Well, first of all, Secretary Duncan, I want to thank you for the opportunity to sit up here on this panel. This is my first time in this room. And
it's always like this.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. You know, I'm here representing a couple of different fronts. One is the county that I represent, Delaware County, Ohio. And then also a part of a 5,000-member contingency of the Fight Crime and Invest in Kids. 5,000 of my colleagues in the criminal justice system, prosecutors, sheriffs, and chiefs of police all realize that we can't arrest ourselves out of problems. And we need to be thinking in progressive terms on how we can prevent crime. I personally have been a 10-year member of the Fight Crime and Invest in Kids, and so we know the value of early education and in preventing crime. I think I'm uniquely qualified to speak today because not only am I a law enforcement practitioner for 34 years and a law enforcement executive for the last 10, but I'm married to an intervention specialist, a school teacher for 30-plus years. And I will tell you that we have sat around the dinner table on many occasions and talked about the at-risk students that she sees in the elementary school as a intervention specialist. And I wish I had a nickel for every time she told me that you're going to see that student someday. And when we go back and track that student's history, we know what kind of homes and families they come from and the lack of opportunities they've had early on for early education. If I might digress for just a moment to tell a quick story, I was a young police officer. My wife was a young intervention specialist, and we were asked to foster a young boy who, frankly, I had been in his home many times on domestic occurrences. And I will tell you there was little to no education there. I know for a fact he had no early education. Unfortunately, that young man grew up to be a career criminal. And frankly, I still have an association with him, but unfortunately, it's behind bars in our county jail. So I will tell you, we've spent thousands of dollars trying to rehabilitate him, thousands of dollars in warehousing him, and unfortunately, perhaps if we could have reached him at an earlier age, would have made a significant difference. So I'm grateful to be here, and as the panel progresses, I think I can address more of the benefits that we see in law enforcement of this kind of programming.
Thanks. LaJune, you've been with Kellogg for a while. Thrilled you're now running the show, CEO. Pretty cool. And obviously many, many things that you guys can and do invest in, but you've provided just extraordinary leadership in this early childhood space. Why, with so many other worthy causes, things that could make a difference, why are you so focused on early childhood education?
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Secretary Duncan, for having me here as well. And I want to say good morning to many of our grantees that are sitting in the audience and listening as well, because philanthropy does its work through all of you. And particularly Fight Crime and Invest in Kids is a grantee of ours. And to your point, we are in this space because our founder, Will Keith Kellogg, was in this space. The foundation has been in early childhood education since the 1930s. And Mr. Kellogg believed, one, that we needed to make sure that children had health, happiness, and well-being. And he also believed that education offered the best opportunity to improve one generation over another. So as we look at this work, we look at it very holistically. We look at all the conditions in a community that affect a child's ability to thrive. Education is at the core, but it also has to do with community environments, their health, what's going on in their families, how partnerships and communities are forming to wrap themselves around the children. And what we can do is help facilitate, influence, and advance the innovations that's happening in community. And we're very committed to doing this work.
Thank you. And Eric, I'm a big fan of. He's a big city superintendent like I was, and he's doing fantastic work there. But before we even get to early childhood space, and I'll come back to that, Eric, maybe just let folks know, as you came into the job, what was the state of education in Cleveland, and what have you tried to do? I'm going to come back to leave out early ed for a second. What have you tried to do to turn things in a better course there for your city's children?
Sure. So I came into the superintendency in Cleveland at the height of the recession, which had a huge impact on urban education across the country, but really brought us to the brink. We were in near financial bankruptcy as a system, and were as close to academic bankruptcy as we could get as well. Years of flat performance despite lots and lots of efforts. And so I had a never waste a good crisis opportunity. And so I got the opportunity to work very closely with our mayor and both Republican and Democratic legislators in Ohio to actually change law in Ohio to give Cleveland a fresh start in educating kids by changing flexibilities in state law, labor practices, to modernize labor practices in our city, and to build partnerships with entities that are not K-12. So charter schools is one space, actually early childhood is another. Really taking a point of view of being agnostic to form, but really adhering to quality as our currency, so to speak. And so it's called the Cleveland Plan for Transforming Schools. We're 3 years into it now. Graduation rates are up 12.1% in 3 years. So it's moving, but it's only going to keep moving if we start at the very beginning, which is why we're so excited to be here today.
Thanks. And Professor Yoshikawa, I was reading your bio last night, prolific author and scholar, worked on many, many different things, could continue to work on many different things at NYU. Why are you so focused on this early childhood space?
Well, thank you, Secretary Duncan, for moderating this panel and for your commitment to early education. Well, I started in this space purely by accident as a graduate student running across a paper that showed some of the first long-term effects of early childhood intervention on antisocial behavior and delinquency. So that was about 24 years ago. I think what we have in this field is a stronger research base for more disciplines and fields than practically any other area of public policy. It's hard to name an area of policy that has support from neuroscience, from economics, from developmental psychology, and hundreds of evaluations. And so recently we put together a consensus letter summarizing the research evidence on preschool education because I think the public, and certainly those with means, have voted with their feet. They put their kids in preschool education if they can afford it. But we need more of this research evidence out there to get those who can't access it more access to quality preschool education, because the research evidence is clear. No matter what research method you use, whether you restrict to the randomized experiments or include some other rigorous methods, we consistently see positive short-term impacts. I think we see economic gains from high-quality preschool education, as the Council of Economic Advisors has shown. So it continues to be an exciting field. I think it was serendipitous that I happened to run across it when I was a graduate student, but it's been a big part of my career, of many thousands of great researchers, and I think that is paying off in terms of lessons for practice and policy.
And Eric, I'll come back to you that in education, we're often good at working really hard, but we're also good at sort of staying in our silos. So often K-12 doesn't talk to higher ed. K-12 doesn't deal with early childhood education, and we all love to point fingers and blame the other part of the continuum for not doing their job well. So with all the challenges you face running the K-12 system, why did you decide to really delve into this early childhood space, and what are you trying to do, the plan for your 3- and 4-year-olds in Cleveland? Maybe talk a little bit about that, but why, given everything else you could be working on, is this now a huge focus?
Well, so there's certainly enough to do. I would start there. But I think it goes to, there's so much evidence about early childhood education, but there's also, you know, a lot of our data has names, right? When we look at the data in Cleveland, only about 50% of our children have experienced an early childhood experience that has them kindergarten ready. And then when we look at our 3rd grade reading, only about 50% of our students are actually on track for 3rd grade reading. And then as we move into middle school math, only about 50%. And when I took over as superintendent, only 50% made it to graduation. And the best intervention is prevention. If I don't have to try to spend 13 years solving a problem, I'm going to be much more successful for the kids that I serve. And so, so that was one of the pieces that really got my focus on it. Another was very practical. When we had to make budget cuts, we started cutting early childhood education, and our community responded. And that really signaled that our community really values early childhood education. Cleveland and Cuyahoga County has been working on universal preschool for long before I came on the picture. And so it gave me the opportunity to reach out to partners in the George Gunn Foundation in our county, many others, and say, you know, so we know this is a basic platform. We also know that we are woefully behind in service compared to what we need. Let's put a stake in the sand that every 3-year-old and every 4-year-old must have an early childhood experience of high quality. And we pulled together, I'd say, 50 stakeholders less than a year ago, and we are already 1,000 seats up from last year, just because of the public-private partnership commitment to getting all of our 4-year-olds first into quality service.
And let me just ask quickly, so it's fantastic to expand access. I think the goal for all of us here is not always access, just access, but it's quality. So how over time are you going to assess whether what that expansion is leading to better academic and social outcomes for your kids?
Sure. So our first measure is kindergarten readiness, because, you know, a lot of times in our field we measure the inputs and say, well, we did a good job with the input and therefore it must work. Our first goal is kindergarten readiness, and so we're measuring whether we're closing the gap between our county and our state on kindergarten readiness. As far as provider readiness, because you do need to have a good bet, we are using Ohio's Step Up to Quality, which is part of the Race to the Top early learning grants, and we're assessing providers as quickly as possible to make sure that we have as many students in those 3-, 4-, and 5-star rated programs so that they're highly likely to exit kindergarten ready.
June, I'll come back to you. And this summit was sort of born of a couple things. First of all, it was the president's sense of urgency and how important this was, and very candidly, a sense of frustration that Washington and Congress wasn't, with absent George Miller and some other folks who have been amazing, Congress wasn't stepping up to the plate to do more. So the president basically said to us, well, we can sit around and do nothing and complain, or we can do something, and this something turned out to be just this absolute spectacular public-private partnership. But walk me through what you think the right role of government is in this, what you think the right role of philanthropy is this, the right role of the corporate community, corporate sector in helping, and how do all these pieces fit together to try and create a whole?
Sure. And the Kellogg Foundation, we funded in all of those spaces. We funded the national level, internationally, as well as at the state and local levels. And what we're learning is real change happens at the local level. And there's a partnership that needs to form, but the real sustainable change happens when you have local partnerships and local people who are actually very much wedded to the solutions and will live those solutions day to day. So as we've looked at our work, we started out with more of a national focus. We called it Securing Partnerships to Assure Ready Kids. It was our SPARK initiative. But even as we had this national approach, we looked at it in very local places, and we've always wanted to understand the connection. We can influence at the national level. We build partnerships there, but the real partnerships happen in place. We build leadership in place, we look at the conditions in place, and we understand what needs to shift. We look at the racial equity conditions in place. We want to know the community will around making this change happen and stick long term. And when that happens, I think what we've learned is partnerships, they grow, they learn, and then they own the solutions coming out of that. And then we can influence the state level and federal level to help fund those activities. So I can give you an example. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, one of the places that we're working with in the state of Michigan, there's a great swelling of investment there. But what we learned was there were 4 communities, particularly communities of color, that were not progressing in this progress. And so we actually worked with the community to determine what the issue was. In this case, it was access. And we determined through a collaborative that if we increased access, the children in these communities would succeed. Just a $2 million grant from the Kellogg Foundation and many partners, 500 new seats, and in 2 years, those 500 children went from 83% not ready for kindergarten to 85% ready for kindergarten. 2 years. And what that did was influence at the state level as well as the national level additional investments.
And Sheriff, walk me through, I think we have some sense of what's the profile of the typical person that you're locking up? And if that's not the goal, it's just interesting, it's a sort of sad thing to do, but where we in education fail, that's like full employment for law enforcement. But what you're saying is you don't want that. You want to, have less folks coming your way. But what's the profile of people that you're incarcerating? And then what do you think are the best prevention strategies to try and get ahead of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I want to put aside any myths. Law enforcement officers in general, we don't like putting people in jail. It's a function of the job. And we know that those without a high school diploma, 7 out of 10 times are going to our jails are housed by 7 out of 10 people that don't have a high school diploma. So we know that education has a significant impact on criminology in this country. Lejeune and I spoke briefly. We talked about the necessity to work out of silos anymore. And the progressive law enforcement executives that I've been around over the last decade, we're looking at data, we're looking at statistics, what makes a difference? And when it comes to crime prevention, this is a real substantive issue. Eric reminded me before we came out here, he opened up a high school in our county. It's a conservative county, and it's no secret that I'm a Republican elected sheriff in a very conservative county. Right, Eric?
Right.
He knows that.
Very conservative.
Very conservative. I'll probably have to answer questions to my constituency why I was out here. But I'm going to tell you, this is a bipartisan issue. We're talking about quality of... Thank you. It's a bipartisan issue. We're talking really about quality of life for our communities, right? We've seen enough tough headlines in the last couple of weeks. Law enforcement doesn't want to have those type of headlines. We would rather be taking resources out of our jails, out of arresting people, and solving problems in the communities. A third of my budget is assigned to the jail. And I will tell you that when I walk through the jail periodically, I encounter a lot of our offenders who have just come from tough situations, no opportunity for early education. So it's easy for me to be here and talk about the value of this. We would much rather attend graduations and see people in caps and gowns than to see them in handcuffs and orange suits.
And if I could just reflect a little, because I did work in the same community as Sheriff Martin, he's particularly remarkable also because it's a community that really could pretend it doesn't have to focus on early childhood education. It is largely a community of middle class, upper middle class families who are finding success, who largely can have the means. And it's particularly remarkable, and I want to say this publicly, that we have a sheriff who not only believes so much in early childhood, but is able to discriminate and make sure that every child is going to have this experience, when it really would be pretty easy to say that's somebody else's problem. So I think that's worth noting here.
Thank you, Eric.
Let me just sort of follow up on the politics of it a little bit, because to my great joy, this has really become a bipartisan issue at the local and state level. So mayors, governors, you look at the grants we gave out yesterday, New Mexico, Nevada, Alabama, very conservative places, absolutely thrilled to be, having more resources for this. But again, candidly, we've struggled here in Washington with our friends in Congress. Some bipartisan bill that Congressman Miller and others worked on, but candidly, it's sort of like a handful of Republicans at the national level who have said this is the right thing to do. So a lot of success at the local and state level. I'd say historic success over the past couple of years, but we haven't quite cracked the nut here. So what's your advice to me, what's your advice to all of us as to how we make this a national movement that is absolutely bipartisan or nonpartisan, just focused on kids and families?
Well, I was up here a couple of weeks ago and had an opportunity as a guest of Fight Crime, Invest in Kids to talk to legislators on both sides of the aisle. And the message was this does make a difference in our communities for public safety. We would much rather spend the money up front, and as has already been noted in today's briefing, it's the return on investment. It sounds cliche, but it's kind of like that old oil filter commercial. You can pay me now or you can pay me later. And I know we've spent a lot of money as of late trying to rehabilitate re-entry and assimilate criminals back into society. And I just think it's of value on both sides of the aisle to take a look at how we can prevent those young people before they become criminals.
Let me ask the, okay, sorry.
I was just going to add, Secretary Duncan, I think we all can play a role in and be influential in this space. And what we have to do is work together and build coalitions. And I think the louder that coalition is, the greater we will be heard in Washington. And that's, I think, this bottom-up approach, but really building coalitions and alignment around the expectations and what we're asking for, and to make sure that that is all of us working together.
Just to, Eric, on the politics of this, Cleveland has had a tough economic time, not a lot of, extra tax dollars laying around. You and the mayor have gone back to the public to get more support for public education in a very difficult climate and been pretty successful there. So maybe walk through what you did, but also just your local politics and how you were able to ask people successfully to invest more in education.
So our mayor is a tremendous leader of education in our community. He is a very unpolitician-like politician. He doesn't particularly like public speaking. He's very reserved, but he's very, very genuine. And so when we started our reform package, the first thing he did is go to our Republican governor, a Democrat mayor going to a Republican governor and saying, I need help and here's what I need. Brought Democrats from Cleveland, Cuyahoga County down to our Delaware County and Franklin County, our more conservative part of the state, and found Republican partners and built a coalition. So from the beginning, we've had a bipartisan coalition of people working on education in Cleveland. When I mentioned we were near financial bankruptcy, and so when the mayor asked, so what's it going to cost to do this, and frankly, I put the price tag in front of him, everybody said, well, that can't be done. And the mayor said, he says it has to. And so we went to the community and passed in Cleveland a 15 mil tax levy direct from voters, which essentially doubled homeowner taxes in the city of Cleveland. And the mayor is very quick to remind me and all of us who are charged with those dollars that this is a tax that Clevelanders couldn't afford and passed anyway. And it passed with a big margin, 57% of our taxpayers. Part of that was on a promise of early childhood education. 2 years later, we had to come back and renew or lose our capital campaign. And so at the last November election, we came back to the community and asked them to continue a capital bond, even on the heels of this giant tax increase. It passed with 63% of the vote, and that, I would argue, also was built on, in that is a promise for the expansion of the classroom facilities for early childhood education. But it's largely in Cleveland, it is about a truly cross-collaborative partnership that we have worked really intentionally to build, and then focusing on core issues that our community really cares about.
And let me just push a little bit to go to another level of detail. So you say you went to the community and then you went back to the community, but that wasn't just one speech or one whatever. What was your strategy? What was tactically, what did you do to encourage the public to do something that they couldn't afford to do?
So we started by building a wide coalition of people that represented virtually every stakeholder group. So we went to faith leaders, business leaders, charter school leaders, our teachers union leadership, Democrats, Republicans, philanthropy, and brought everybody to the table. And again, this is where I think our mayor just did an incredible job, is anytime an adult issue got in the way and people would say, well, I don't like this because, he would say, okay, this is the problem. You don't like my solution. You tell me what the solution is, but we're not leaving until we get this problem solved. So he really helped us stay problem focused. Once we had that coalition going, then from a school district perspective, we really radically overhauled how we talk with our community. Cleveland is a smaller community, so we can be very personal, but we hadn't been. We would have very large auditoriums like this. I would stand and give a speech for half an hour. People would stand up and scream at me for half an hour. We would chart it on chart paper. I'd go home mad. They'd go home mad. We don't know where the chart paper went, and nothing changed, right? And so we finally had this, so I think the one thing I bring to leadership is I know how much I don't know. And so I remember sitting with my team one day and saying, you know what, they didn't teach us this in principal school. So like, who knows how to do this? And it fundamentally changed how we talk to our community. So now we don't host meetings as a school district. All of our partners host meetings where we are the invited guest. I do share content, but then we actually make a show of a student or a parent throwing me out of the meeting so that they can talk about me and talk about our work. And we have neighborhood partners who facilitate those conversations. And then we come back in a listening mode, and we're all growing and learning together, and that's helped us continue to strengthen this coalition. It also means we don't do 4 meetings, we do hundreds of meetings, and we spread out, and again, it requires a collaboration and a partnership that is what is the core of our work right now.
No, it's really helpful, and the fact that no one is taught to do these things well, I hope someone's writing this stuff down or lessons. I think you honestly have a lot to share with other folks going through similar stuff.
Well, I can share everything we don't know how to do well. I've done them all.
I want to ask the professors, you said there's been a huge amount of research in this space. If you had, half an hour with folks who are on the fence thinking about it, but we can't afford it, again, local, state, federal level, what's the most compelling research as to why we need to provide more children with access to high-quality early learning opportunities?
Well, I think I would start with the fact that we certainly have a public education system that starts at age 5, but children are learning from birth. And in fact, the developing brain is more sensitive to environmental influence in the first years of life than later in life. I mean, it's not that later education and interventions can't help youth and kids in middle childhood. They absolutely can, but that if you miss the investment during the early childhood years, you're missing a point at which neurons are developing at the rate of millions per second. And those are sensitive. They respond to the kind of nutrition of environmental enrichment. And that's why there's an absolute hardcore scientific reason to invest in early childhood. Then, of course, I think there are the economic returns which come from these decades of evaluation research. And there, I think I would talk about not just the landmark studies that show the lifetime effects in reducing crime, for example, reducing teen pregnancy, increasing earnings, but this recent wave of evidence, which I think is very exciting, which I think it relates to a lot of the work going on in Cleveland, in Michigan, and states across the country, where certain cities and states have been able to implement preschool education at scale with high quality. This is what we all want, right? We want it. We don't want to just provide access. We need to provide access with quality. And so these are cities like Boston and Tulsa, the entire state of Oklahoma, the state of New Jersey. They have done certain things that research shows has really strong lessons for the field of not just early education, but I would say education from birth to adulthood. And that means, first of all, thinking about the kinds of skills of the adults who work with kids. Child learning depends on adult learning and adult skills. And so when teachers are provided with the supports in the classroom, supportive feedback, mentors and coaches who really understand what it means to build all the different socio-emotional, cognitive, self-regulation skills of preschoolers, that is when quality goes up. When we have curricula that are focused on particular, really important domains that predict later learning, high school graduation, crime, things like early language and literacy, math skills, socio-emotional skills, executive function skills, when there are these curricula that support those skills and are supported with that kind of coaching, I think cities and states have shown big impacts on kids. And that's a really, I think, exciting wave of evidence that's not just about the rationale for whether to invest in young kids, but how to actually do it.
Now, June and I talked to Eric a little bit about folks in education staying in their silos, and people in this room might be shocked to hear that sometimes foundations stay in their silos and don't always talk and communicate. And quite candidly, we had a meeting with some extraordinary leaders in this space in the White House, and people doing amazing work and very little awareness of what other folks around the room were doing, which was interesting. So what are you doing? What can you do? What can we do, again, given scarce resources and the need to partner and leverage to get the philanthropic community to work in a more collaborative manner on this and on other issues, frankly?
Yes. I want to make a bold statement and say foundations used to work in silos. I believe more recently that foundations have come together. They've come together on several issues, but in this particular space, an example in Michigan, all of the foundations in Michigan have come together and really begun to talk about what structures do we need to do the work that we're doing and be more effective at it. So in Michigan, for example, foundations collectively have funded an Office of Foundation Liaison, which is an office that is linked between Lansing and the governor's office and philanthropy. So information like you're talking about, philanthropy can make sure that that information is available to the legislature through this Office of Foundation Liaison. Michigan was the first foundation collaboration to have such an office, but now it has grown and there are over 12 of these offices across the country. But what we're learning in philanthropy is we do have to learn from one another, and we must leverage our dollars. And where we can do that and really make it stick is at the local level and then on issues that we're all working in, like recently the whole My Brother's Keeper initiative, and how there are now over 40 foundations working together as part of an executive alliance to make sure that as we're doing the work in our own jurisdictions, we understand the issues of these young males. And it's definitely connected to the work that we're doing in early childhood development as well.
Thank you. Sheriff, you've been at this for a while. Your wife has lived it, so you have an awareness that many folks don't. You've been with Fight Crime Invest in Kids for 10 years. So walk me through the evolution of how that's grown, where you think that is at today, and where you think 5, 10 years from now the law enforcement community will be on this issue in particular.
Well, I'm out here today with the president of Council for Strong America, David Cass, and I think they're doing it right. They're bringing together several pillars of leadership, including the faith-based community, admirals and generals, law enforcement executives, chiefs, chiefs, prosecutors, and sheriffs. So you've got that partnership, and those people can use their positions as a bully pulpit to talk about this. You know, I'm a taxpayer also, an elected official and taxpayer, and you want to be a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars. So, you know, I think it's critical that law enforcement executives, and we're doing this now. We've been doing this for a while. We've been doing it for several years, is looking at the data. looking at the best practices. And one of the things that I was encouraged to be a part of this today is we're talking about quality and not just putting a program out there and checking a box. So I think that if the money's available for these at-risk families and children, I think you'll begin to see a difference in crime-related issues over the next 5 or 10 years. And I think more and more law enforcement executives will get behind this as we look for long-term responses to criminal issues.
Professor, I want to ask you, so I'm thrilled with the expansion that we're seeing in many more states playing. So 2 questions. I worry about making sure that we still have quality going forward and it's not just slots and not just programs. So walk me through your advice to us collectively as to how we assure quality as we see pretty significant expansions, and again, many different players, school systems, non-for-profits, private providers, faith-based, Boys and Girls Club, lots of people in this space, so a mixed delivery system, which can be both a strength and a challenge. So how do we ensure that? And then over the next 5, 10 years, looking over the horizon, what's the next generation of research that we need in this space?
Sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the example of Boston because I know it quite well and was involved in its evaluation. I see Jason Sachs, who's the director of early childhood for Boston here. He and the mayor and the leadership there made some, I think, very wise decisions around how to improve quality. First of all, they actually measured quality. There are measures of quality out there that are not high stakes. You don't have to kind of link them to teacher pay in any high stakes kind of way, but to take the pulse of the system. New York City is now, I think, doing that. There's a group at NYU that I'm working with where we're trying to apply that to a much, much larger system. But once you take the pulse of a system, you get a sense of where its quality is. And based on the fact that it could be better, he acted on it. And the combination was to actually go to the literature. There is an enormous research literature on the effectiveness of curricula. And what are the curricula for important skills that do the best job? And he decided to test a couple of those at scale, and then not just throw the curricula at the system, which often happens, and all right, teachers hear about it in July or August, and you're expected to implement it in September, but to actually hire talented coaches and mentors who would come to the classrooms, were well trained in the curricula, but actually supported the full range of good things that teachers can do in classrooms. So even though the curricula were focused on language and math, these coaches could support the teachers in the kids' socio-emotional development, their behavior problems. So it's this kind of system that provides adult learning. So if we think about how we learn at work, we learn when people observe us doing work and providing supportive feedback. And unfortunately, education is an area where, you know, teachers go into their classrooms, they shut their doors, and you're not alone, you're with the students, but no one often comes in to see what you're doing. So, so this system, I think, of coaching and mentoring supports and curricula that are effective and focused and enjoyable for kids, very engaging. That is now being spread to a variety of community providers in Boston, which I think is a really important movement. And it is spreading up. So Jason is now designing the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way up to third grade, the curricula. How can we think about the whole child in a way that is informed by an excellent early education base and move up? And then I would say in terms of the wave of research that's needed, we need to move down. And so we need to think about the birth to 3 supports that will work the best. I think there's actually a small new wave of exciting programs that are being shown to work around parenting. And how do we engage families? How do we engage families around their economic lives, their parenting, which of course is a traditional focus, but I think it's very exciting to also think about parents' own education and interventions that really provide these 2 generations of support, and to really figure out how to address the most severe sources of stress for some families. And those are things like mental health issues, substance use issues, domestic violence. How can we provide the supports that really recognize that these are families with young kids, but they really need that extra level of support starting at birth and then in a kind of continuum through the early years, so that by third grade we see great school outcomes, but we also see, you know, kids who are thriving in all different ways.
And Eric, step back for a minute. And obviously, you're doing extraordinary work in Cleveland, but you're part of a network of about 100 urban superintendents who are all dealing with very similar challenges of poverty, of lack of resources, whatever. What's your honest take? You're obviously a believer and a leader in this space. What's your honest take as to where most of your peers or colleagues are in terms of seeing the connection, investing their time and resources, and expanding opportunity? Are we where we need to be in other urban school districts? Are we not? What's your assessment?
So I would say if you talk with any of our peers, and Secretary, you were in the network, I think you would say the same thing. We all understand the value. So intrinsically, the leaders in our urban communities understand the critical importance. But our systems are not structured to reinforce our investment. So we are K through 12 providers. We are responsible to taxpayers, balancing budgets and everything else. And so it takes a very intentional risk, frankly, that some leaders either aren't able to do because of the conditions they're in or aren't willing to do. And so I think that creates a very uneven application of K through 12 leadership in this space. And you know, one of the big risks that I think we all share, and it's connected to this, is that this is a investment. It's a return on investment that's going to pay off. But we're not going to see the reduction in crime next year because of the grants that were awarded yesterday, or the $8 to $1 economic impact in our cities next year because of the investment this year. And we tend to be very patient with the failure we've had in education, but very impatient with the solutions that actually have a lot of evidence that they work. And so we really have got to tackle this with a urgent persistence. And back to the point of school superintendents, the average tenure right now is 3.2 years. There's not a lot of persistence that's going to allow this to have legs long term if we don't really rethink how we tackle this.
June, I'd ask you to sort of challenge us. I'll challenge you a little bit on the collaboration foundations. But at the end of the day, again, while this is an amazing historic time, as a nation, I think we're all here because we know we're not close to where we need to be. And quite frankly, at the federal level, we have failed to make the investments that I think so many of us are convinced we have to make. So what's your candid advice to us? What have we gotten right? What have we gotten wrong? And if we need to sort of fundamentally crack this nut and do it much sooner than later, what could we do differently or better to try and get the national consensus that we need?
I think the fundamental issue is listening to people in communities and working with them to understand what they need. A lot of times we come with solutions, and I think we should start with listening. And what we've learned at the Kellogg Foundation is that you must listen, and then you do take risks to try some of those things that may not be textbook savvy, but they work on the ground. And I think that's the biggest message I could say is we need to come up with structures and ways that we can actually meet the community on the ground where they are and then roll that up to policy.
And Sheriff, I want to come back to you just a second on the local politics. So again, appreciate so much your courage and leadership on this, but as Eric said, this is not a natural place for you to be, and there's some political risk here, and you have successfully navigated that. So what has worked for you, and how have you been able to bridge that potential divide or gap?
Well, I think Eric, and I appreciate his comments earlier, but he did a good job describing my community. But as Eric knows, Delaware County has been prosperous, and as a result of that, the population has grown, and the demographics have begun to change. I've sat in on multiple boards where we've taken a look at the population, and a lot of people are coming to suburbia, looking for resources that they can't find perhaps in an urban area. And I will tell you that about a third of our prisoners locally in jail come from our neighboring urban communities. So they're leaving the urban areas and coming into suburban communities and committing offenses. So, and I know for a fact that many of those, unfortunately, gang members, we're housing federal prisoners right now in a very violent gang, and I suspect strongly that they did not receive early education and the kind of modeling. And the thing that I'm most encouraged about to be a part of this today is, you know, I again, representing my constituents, we don't want the federal government telling us what to do, obviously. But we do see the value in the partnerships both at the public and private level. And I think it's incumbent on us, if we can reach out to those at risk, provide quality programs, hold people accountable that they're doing the right thing, and make sure those grant dollars are being followed appropriately, you know, I think that's an easy sell for me, even with a conservative constituency.
Thank you. We just have a little bit of time left, so maybe just go down the line and give you each a minute or two. Any final thoughts? Anything we missed? Anything you'd love to leave this audience of people who are passionate believers and leading this movement? Any advice for them? Just go right down the line. Start with the professor.
Sure. I think no one wants to read hundreds of studies, but there is a consensus letter out that's just a couple pages long that over 500 researchers have signed that summarizes a report called Investing in Our Future, the evidence based on preschool education from supported by the Foundation for Child Development and the Society for Research in Child Development. And to get 500 researchers to agree on anything, try that. But it shows how strong this evidence base truly is. And I think that consensus letter, I think, can be, to the extent that it's helpful in particular local policy contexts where it could be bolster an argument for increased investment in early childhood education, I think that would be great. I think the arc of public education in this country is a long one. This country was the world leader in primary education in the 19th century, the leader in higher education in the 20th century, and I think we need to be the leader in early education in the 21st century. And last week, the Secretary General of the United Nations included a commitment to early childhood education in the next Sustainable Development Goals for the years 2015 to 2030. This is really a global movement, a recognition that research can make a difference in the lives of millions and millions of children worldwide. And I think the U.S. can be a leader again, but in this critical area of early education where right now it's fallen behind.
I think the thing that I would leave our conversation with is, I think what we're trying to do in Cleveland, and I would encourage others, and we heard it here in multiple ways, is to move beyond collaboration and get to interdependence. And I think what we have done really smartly, and probably largely by accident, but we'll call it smart, was that we didn't build a collaboration. We built an interdependency that if any one of us doesn't pull our weight, the entire system fails. Not just the K-12, but all of us are intertied together in a way that it is hard to unravel, which means that it can move beyond the current leader of any particular organization and that sort of thing. And so I heard it in Lejeune's comments. We know it from the research of what cities have done when they've done it well. It's an example in the sheriff and his role. I would really encourage us to think about how we create interdependencies that are hard to break as opposed to our more typical collaborative kind of strategies.
And I'll just build on that. When you think about where investments are going in the future, particularly philanthropic investments, what we're looking at is this concept of what is the lived environment around this particular issue. That has to do with families, the economic security of the family, what's going on in the community, what do the children have access to quality education as well as health care, food and nutrition, et cetera. So as we're looking at the funding stream, we want to bring in all of those partners so that we're doing taking a holistic approach to the answer and not really isolated in how we look at how this child is thriving in the community.
Sheriff Martin, final word.
Policing a free society is a tough job. And unfortunately, we've seen that up close and personal in the last couple of weeks. So a lot of great men and women in this country serving our communities with the intent of helping people. The reason why I went into this, law enforcement executives today need to have a global approach of what makes a difference in our communities. And public safety is at a crossroads with public education and private education and people working together to make a difference. I think it's incumbent on law enforcement executives to ask tough questions, to review the data, and see what really makes a difference in their communities.
Please give a round of applause to our panel. Fantastic. Great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman George Miller.
thank you. Not much stuff to be said. It's a hell of a place to put a congressman. But we can rise to the occasion, so buckle up. We can occupy time. Whole year, as a matter of fact. No, thank you so much. And first of all, let me thank President Obama for convening you here today and for the interest that he has reignited across this country in early learning, the interest that he has reignited in the Congress of the United States to get us to come together on a bipartisan basis. And for Secretary Duncan, who has led that effort in the Congress. And part of that process feeds into much of what was heard here today. And that was to try and reacquaint this Congress that some people say is divisive. Other terms that go along there too. But the fact was to to reacquaint them with the data, with the parts of their community that see a deep interest in the success of early learning opportunities, early educational opportunities, whatever the phrase is you want to use, and to see if we could bring them together around a new initiative in this effort. And that was a strong start for education that Senator Tom Harkin and I introduced that reflected the values that the President had asked for, the flexibility that the President asked for, and the effort to listen to local governmental entities and philanthropic entities about how we might bring this nation together around this effort. We interviewed many, many Republicans in the House of Representatives on this effort. There were many who were full support of the effort, but were concerned about the factions in their parties, whether they could survive this, whether they would get a primary challenge, and all of the rest of that. That's the politics. That's the world I live in. But the fact of the matter was, we did secure Republican support as co-authors on this legislation, first time in a long time coming. We supported we garnered the commitment that should this bill make it to the floor, they in fact would vote for it, many more Republicans than that. And that's the beginning. I'm a great believer, after 40 years in politics, in the cycles of politics, the cycles of history. And I think we're at a cycle that we were at once before. And that was when President Reagan came to office. There was a great effort across the country to reduce spending. Spending had to be cut, spending had to be cut, government spending had to be cut. Spending was the word. And they picked the word for a reason, because it suggests sort of a cavalier idea. Just spend it. We, under Speaker O'Neill, created the Select Committee on Children, Youth, and Families, and we thought long and hard about this. I see Deborah Phillips here, and Ann Rosewater, and other people that were on that, that helped us with that committee. And of course, the notion was that we would invest. We would invest. That those other people wanted to spend. We wanted to invest. We were a little bit smarter than the rest of the people in this effort. And we took what research was available then, and we convinced the Congress and we convinced the President of the United States. The test at that time was whether or not we could grow Head Start and whether we could get this very conservative Congress to make an investment in Head Start. And at one point, it was known as, I didn't pick the term, but Ron and Nancy's favorite program. And we succeeded in that effort, and that was the beginning to turn this around. Today, I think we're there again. I think with this incredible cascade and confluence of research that is so practical in the education community and in the political community, that we have got to leave this meeting and understand the importance of taking advantage of this atmosphere. Not because of what we're doing to lead in Congress, but because what we see, and you just heard testify here, what law enforcement, thank you, Sheriff, what law enforcement is doing in support of this legislation, what mayors are doing, what boards of super county governments are doing, what educators are doing, recognizing for so many in this large universe, this headache has not gone away. But now they've been given the tools, they've been given the research, they've been given the help for professional development, and they've gotten the support of the business communities in their communities. They've gotten the support of parents. They've gotten the support of service organizations, and it's there. Congress comes late to these issues. We're not an initiator. We're a reaction. We react to the country. We react to our districts. We react to events. And I'm telling you that with this conference is recognizing that the stage has been set, the table has been set, whatever the terms you want to use. We use them all in my place. We're very redundant. This is the opportunity that we've sort of talked about over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And your participation in this conference is about being in the vanguard of that. Invest in children, fight crime, invest in children. When my district attorney said he wanted to talk to me about child care, he wasn't particularly supportive of me, and he was going to bring some deputies, and he was going to bring the county sheriff, who was sort of supportive of me. I was stunned when they laid out the program, and they laid it out with a sense of knowledge. And of course, that was also a springboard to then talk about to county government, to talk to the various boards of education about why they wanted to participate in this effort, because it's about their community. Part of my congressional district has been listed among the most deadly cities in the United States many times. Not every year, but we're there quite often. And by now changing the investment policy, investing in children, in fighting crime, investing in community policing, investing in early childhood education. In a rather poor community, they voted 3 times to raise their property taxes, to invest in new facilities for early learning, to invest in new schools for their community. And in the last 2 years, our crime rate has been cut in half. Our chief of police, who believes in this, was asked to go to Ferguson to try to explain how you might deal with the community. This is a majority-minority community, and yet we've made these advances. And that's joined in an effort by Chevron, who's an investor in this, the largest employer in the area. They see that the benefit of this in their community relations and the kind of community they want to work in. I'm just leaving you with this message. I think we have an opportunity politically to organize on behalf of these children, on behalf of these families, on behalf of the future of this country that we haven't had in a decade. And I think we have to take that opportunity. Many of you have been out there tending the fires to keep it alive. But I think now Congressman Hanna from New York, Republican, is going to reintroduce the bill. And I think now is an opportunity to bring this issue, whether it's in the form of this bill or whatever, or in an appropriations fight, that the nation is ready and wants this effort to be made. And this gives Congress something that we don't get all of the time. And that is really the opportunity to participate in success. And I think we can essentially tell members of Congress, you follow these prescriptions, you invest in these kinds of programs, you train people to interact with children, you convince the community to support this effort, and you'll get an opportunity as an elected official from this community to invest in success in this community. Doesn't always happen in my profession. I think we also have to think about this as we go forward in the reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which I think, in fact, after many years that it hasn't happened, will probably happen in this Congress, that we have to do this in the backdrop of the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, because much of this is about access to poor and minority children, to high-quality education. And it hasn't worked terribly well if you give them that first access in kindergarten or first grade, if they haven't received it earlier. And this is about the civil rights and what it means and what kind of educational opportunities they will be given access to. And I think that is going to be a driver of this issue for this Congress on a bipartisan basis. I'm a pretty good partisan, and but I've worked across the aisle almost all of my 40 years on some of the toughest issues in the Congress. And I'm very confident that this Congress is going to respond differently on these educational issues, and clearly early education is going to be a part of that discussion. And so I just hope that when you finish this afternoon, that you will understand that there's an opportunity waiting outside of Washington, D.C. like we've never seen before. And it's because of the hard work that so many of you have done in this room and I've worked with so many of you across this country, that we have that opportunity available to us. And I think with the continued leadership of President Obama and Secretary Duncan, that you'll be back here for another reason, and that is to participate in signing of legislation that can be successful and ensure a much better and greater opportunity for our children in early learning. I'm leaving after 40 years. This is where I started, and this is where I'm leaving. But I'm not leaving the issue because I see how important this is to the community that I represent. And I'm starting to meet the parents again that now are excited about their child's opportunity. They're excited about their interaction with their children. They're excited that they've been asked to participate after learning a few things about how to approach this. They're tired of what they saw over the last 10 years, 15 years, and that is the impact of the trauma and the absence of this opportunity on their children, and that trauma that we know that takes a very, very serious price for these families and for these children. So we get to work on this very, very positive side of this equation and very, very positive side of engaging with the Congress on this issue. And I think they welcome that engagement. I would just leave you with this. It's about organization. It's about organization, Rahel. and it's not hard. You just have to be persistent. Nobody should ever accept no from a member of Congress. Because when that member of Congress says no to you, at very best, they know they're just buying time because they're going to have to say yes if you want an appointment to talk to them. So just keep asking, and eventually they will say yes. I guarantee you. Come see me. If they don't, I'll talk to you. But it's most important. I learned this lesson from the school food service employees, the people who served at that time. I go back in time. School lunches. They insisted that a member of Congress come and participate in a school lunch program and to talk to the students and to talk to the employees. If you didn't visit the school, they just kept after you. And eventually you found yourself getting your big behind in a little tiny chair, sitting here and opening a little tiny milk carton and eating a little piece of food and talking to them and talking to the kids, and they're pouring the milk in your dish and you're doing the best you can. But when we targeted different members of Congress, when we had the child nutrition bill on the floor, and Michelle Obama has, changed this whole discussion so dramatically. But when we were doing this then, we would sick the lobbying efforts in the community organizations, the invitations to the schools. And then when I'd go talk to the members of the committee or that weren't on the committee, how we were doing, and I said, about the child nutrition bill, he says, oh, let me tell you about my school lunch program. Bingo, we won. I want them to talk about their early childhood education programs. I want to talk about their community efforts. I want them to talk about what their mayor is doing, what their Board of Education is doing. And you can help with all of that. And that will be a success. Some people don't like the political side of it. Without the political side of it, we don't get the other side of it. It's just that simple in this nation. But I think as people, people are commenting about this election and what it means, I think this means opportunity on a bipartisan basis with leadership on both sides at high levels on this issue. We just have to bring it about, and it's there. Thank you so much for all of the years of work. Thank you for your participation. It's been a joy of my life working on this issue, and thank you again to the President for this conference. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago, Dr. James Heckman.
It's a great honor for me to participate in this summit today. And I just want to review some points that we've already heard, and I think we'll hear throughout the summit, that there's a large body of evidence that supports the value of investing in childhood stimulation and nurturing especially for disadvantaged children. There are numerous rigorous empirical studies, including those that have been mentioned, the Perry Preschool Program, the Abecedarian Program, as well as a raft of recent studies that have been mentioned as well. I would put on the table a body of evidence that supports this and supports the fact that if we look at how successful families perform, how they contribute to the developing lives of their children, we see that both from the studies of family influence and from the studies of interventions, that there is a real value to the economy of investing in the human capital of children from birth to 5. So this gathering shows that policymakers, business leaders, and philanthropists are now embracing this evidence-based wisdom of investing in early childhood programs. And I just want to briefly review the evidence and a guideline for the future. So the evidence does provide clear guides for action. First of all, I think now we've come to recognize that American policy is recognizing the power of the accident of birth. A child does not choose the family that he or she is born into. But society now, we understand, can enrich the opportunities that disadvantaged children have, and they can allow these children to flourish. And we can do this by understanding the parenting and supplementing the parenting resources available to children and scaffolding their lives by giving them the kind of nurturing and stimulating environments that are available to children from more advantaged families. Society and the programs launched by these initiatives has to recognize that good parenting is really what it's all about. It's paramount to life success. Without doubt, the family is the greatest contributor to the success of children and to the upward social and economic mobility. And without doubt, in many quarters of our society, the American family is under great stress. The way that parents interact with their children, the amount of time they spend with them, the resources available to provide intellectual and social stimulation greatly affect the children's potential for leading flourishing lives. The evidence shows dramatic differences in achievement test scores and in social, character, socio-emotional skills for children from very different economic and social groups. Children of college-educated mothers achieve at a far greater rate than children whose mothers have a high school degree or even less, are high school dropouts. And we know that these gaps emerge long before children enter school. So 20 years ago, the development psychologist Hart and Risley showed that achievement gaps were substantial as early as age 3. And so in a disadvantaged family, a relatively less advantaged family, I should say, a typical child would hear roughly in an hour, maybe 600 words. By contrast, in the same hour, a child from a professional family would hear over 2,100 words. And that would lead to a gap in the word knowledge at age 3, long before school begins, of 500 words for disadvantaged children that they would knowledge, cumulative vocabulary would know, and versus 1,100 word cumulative vocabulary possessed by children from a professional family. And these early inequality in basic skills tend to persist throughout life and lead to economic and social inequality. So taking the long view, Americans can most effectively address inequality in the larger society with a strategy of pre-distribution by enriching the parenting resources for young children in disadvantaged environments, and not as effectively by redistribution of income to adults. Child disadvantage is not properly measured by lack of money to the parents of children. Unconditional income transfers to poor families are not nearly as effective as is a strategy for enriching the early nurturing environments available to young children that promote a child's physical, mental, and social development. Investments that bolster these capacities are the most effective way to promote social mobility and to encourage a life of achievement and accomplishment. And we know from a number of studies that these have high payoffs economically and socially. So early investments are important simply because of the dynamics of skill formation. Preschool has a positive effect in promoting skills, and we know that those skills are very important and that gaps emerge at age 3. Recent research also documents that multiple skills are important for success in life. For too long, the conventional wisdom in education and policy circles has been to measure success in education and in preschool simply by achievement tests or by the ability of students to show up on a measured academic performance at some stage in their life. And yet what we understand is that when early childhood interventions were judged solely by the success in boosting IQ, that in many cases they failed. But what we've understood and come to understand is the much richer set of skills that are required for success in life and what successful preschools are building. For many tasks in life and in the economy, social and emotional skills, character skills are important, and more important, really, in some cases, than these pure cognitive skills that receive so much attention. So impulse, grit, persistence, impulse control, self-awareness, and sociability can be taught at very early ages, and these have enormous payoffs. And they lead to many, many dimensions of improvement over the life cycle, including higher wages, healthier lifestyles, less participation in crime, and engagement in a variety of socially productive activities. And so, as I said, essential elements for successful early childhood include engaged, supporting parents and early health, nutrition, and learning. We should not underestimate the role of the parent and the power that comes from providing parents with information, resources, and choice. Ensuring that parents have this knowledge and give a stimulating home environment is just as important as anything that happens in a classroom when children are in school later in life. And this is where home visiting programs and other efforts to productively engage the parent in the life of the child come into play. And many of the successful programs have worked exactly on that dimension of life. What's been amazing has been the recent evidence that's shown that early childhood programs, which have normally been thought to look only at improving cognition, have had substantial effects in promoting adult health. So we can see, for example, at age 35, when you look at the children in the ABC-Darien study, randomly assigned it to what was initially designed as a program to improve the cognitive skills of the children, those children essentially ended up with much lower levels of high blood pressure, much less hypertension, much less symptom for diabetes, less obesity, and in many dimensions were successful on dimensions of health. And so these are important dimensions to understand. So that a program that was designed to boost IQ, in fact, worked by boosting both the cognitive and social and emotional skills and had effects across all aspects of life performance. So the evidence shows that it's much more effective, as the Sheriff Martin was saying earlier, that there's much more evidence now to think about reduction in crime, improvement in health, and the return that have been estimated $8 per unit dollar invested, 7 to 10% per annum rates of return, suggests that there's a very strong economic case for investing. So quality early childhood programs for disadvantaged children are not entitlements or bottomless wells for social spending. They are not government boondoggles. The investments we make today in disadvantaged young children promote social mobility, they create opportunity, they foster a vibrant, healthy, and inclusive society. And investing in this, as we heard earlier, and I think we should hear more throughout the day, is really a bipartisan strategy. It's really a strategy that appeals to Americans across all economic, social, and partisan lines. It promotes family values. It strengthens the American family by offering voluntary programs that enrich the lives of children. And it fosters social inclusion, the productivity of the American workforce, and creates a healthier society for all. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to a very active day.
Every morning, thousands of Americans open their homes and hearts to children from their communities. They stay throughout the day, learning, playing, and growing. Most children in the U.S. are cared for by home-based child care providers like Ivania. Her small business in suburban Virginia is on the front lines of making sure young children start out strong, so they do well in school in a few short years. Helping children grow strong means helping their providers grow stronger businesses, with the education, professional development, and resources they need to do a hard job well. I'm Julianne Moore. As a mom and ambassador for Save the Children, I want to ensure all children are fortunate enough to have someone like Ivania in their lives. When we invest in them, we invest in us.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Secretary of Health and Human Services, Sylvia Matthews Burwell.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here today. early learning is something in a family that has a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old is something that I'm actually quite familiar with on a daily basis. And because of that, often I'm asked about what am I reading, and people expect me, as the Secretary of HHS, to say some intellectual tome. Last week when I answered the question, I said Little House on the Prairie. The week before, though, something a bit more serious, Mo Willems' Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. So I'm quite familiar, as I know you all are, and know that you all would actually know those references in this group. Many of the people that I think that I was interviewed by didn't. But I want to thank you all for all the commitments and all the time, energy, and effort that you all have made and do make every day to deliver in this space, and one that's incredibly important. As the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, I sometimes think of us as the Department of the Kitchen Table, and it's because we work on the issues that every day people are talking about, discussing, and making decisions around the kitchen table, and none of these at HHS is more connected to that table than the issues of early childhood learning and the issues of children's issues throughout that space from actually, we're working before the child is born. And so as a mom, I get to see every day and watching my own kids grow and develop, but we know the science tells us that in the first few years of a child's life, the brain develops 700 new neurological connections every single second. We know that when we give children a jump in their education and help their families establish stable, supportive homes, we help ensure the next generation will be successful in school and have a better shot at a prosperous future. We're helping build a stronger workforce and a stronger community. And so investing in early childhood education is a top priority for both the administration and the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about what we're doing to deliver impact in this space. Like the President, we see this as a continuum, helping children in different ways as they grow and prepare for elementary school. We start even before the children are born with home visits. There are now initiatives in every state that support voluntary home visiting services for pregnant moms and parents with young children up to the age of 5. States can design the programs to best meet the needs of their communities, provided that 75% of the funding is spent on evidence-based models. Decades of research show us that home visits by nurses, social workers, and early childhood educators deliver real outcomes. They provide guidance on good parenting, referrals to any services needed by a trained set of eyes who are watching that child develop. Next, we're working at the next stage to help infants and toddlers with our innovative early Head Start and child care partnerships. We know that starting young can have the greatest benefit. But today, early Head Start only reaches less than 5% of infants and toddlers whose families are in poverty. Our new early Head Start child care partnerships, we may need a smoother name to the proposed in the President's FY14 budget, are an innovative way to expand existing Head Start through collaboration with child care providers. And many of these providers are in areas that previously lacked high-quality child care. We're awarding over $400 million in more than 200 grants for partnerships. Virtually every state is receiving funding and ensuring that children across the nation will benefit from these high-quality early childhood efforts. When these grants are fully operational, we expect that over 30,000 additional children will be able to access early Head Start, around a 25% increase in the size of this program. Next in this continuum, there are the 3- and 4-year-olds, and we'll see them in the regular Head Start program. We're working hard to make Head Start even better. We're investing more in Head Start, about $2.1 billion more since the start of this administration, and at the same time, calling for more accountability by weeding out non-performing grantees. When initiatives deliver, we will invest more in them. When they don't, we won't. And finally, we're addressing a problem that has been more pressing in recent years. We know that too many young children, especially boys of color, are suspended or expelled from early childhood programs. When this happens, kids who often need the most help are left behind. This begins a harmful cycle that leads to poor outcomes, more expulsions, fewer career choices, and possibly even jail or prison. We're working with our colleagues at the Department of Education to develop guidance on how to respond to young children who are struggling and find alternatives to help them. This will help states, early childhood initiatives, and parents work together to keep kids in the classes and centers that will help them stay on track. Together, these investments will allow more infants, toddlers, and children to access the building blocks of healthy and productive lives. With better education, nutrition, and mental and physical health, American children and their families can start the path to a brighter future. I want to thank you all for your commitment to this bright future, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you all for being here today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Learman. I'm with the White House Office of Public Engagement. Welcome. Hope you guys are enjoying everything today. We wanted to make sure you guys got some coffee in you for the rest of the day and some food. So just a couple of things before that. If you leave the building, you will not be able to get back in, so don't leave the building. You can leave your coats here because you all will be coming back down, but you all are going to head up to the Indian Treaty Room, which is room 474. It's out there up to the 4th floor. You can go out either side, but we just ask that you get back down here by 10:40. So we'll see you back down in your seats at 10:40 and head up to the 4th floor. Thank you so much.
The day I first met you, you told